All right, good morning, everybody. It is Monday.
Good morning. We
Right there.
missed yesterday.
Yeah.
We had a little bit of a family emergency.
Yeah, a little Cooper cat had to go to the vet in emergency.
He's in the hospital.
He's been in 2 nights there, and hopefully we'll be able to pick him up, bring him back home tomorrow.
Right.
So appreciate any prayers we have over him. I mean, he's just a cat, but he's our cat.
He's not just a cat. He's Cooper Cat.
He is Cooper Cat.
He's family.
He is.
And anyone who has pets.
Yep. Do anything for him. So that's what we did. We had to scoop him up and, open the vet up for emergency use. But, it is what it is. So hopefully tomorrow he'll be all better.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, today, Jesus teaches about marriage and divorce. And this is a parallel. The first part is Matthew chapter 19, starting at verse 3. Some Pharisees came and tried to trap him with this question: should a man be allowed to divorce his wife for just any reason? Haven't you read the scriptures? Jesus replied. They record that from the beginning God made them male and female. And he said, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. Then why did Moses say in the law that a man could give a wife a written notice of divorce and send her away? They asked. Jesus replied, Moses permitted divorce only as a concession to your hard hearts, but it was not what God had originally intended. And I tell you this, whoever divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery, unless his wife has been unfaithful. Jesus' disciples said to him, if this is the case, it is better not to marry. Not everyone can accept this statement, Jesus said. Only those whom God helps. Some are born as eunuchs, some have been made eunuchs by others, some choose not to marry. For the sake of the kingdom of heaven, let anyone accept this who can. From there we go to Mark chapter 10, starting at verse 2. Some Pharisees came and tried to trap him with this question: should a man be allowed to divorce his wife? Jesus answered them with a question: what did Moses say in the law about divorce? Well, he permitted it, they replied. He said a man can give his wife a written notice of divorce and send her away. But Jesus responded, he wrote this commandment only as a concession to your hard hearts. But God gave them male and female, made them male and female, from the beginning of creation. This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. Later, when he was alone with his disciples in the house, they brought up the subject again. He told them, whoever divorces his wife and marries someone else commits adultery against her, and if a woman divorces her husband and marries someone else, she commits adultery. Okay. And now the commentary for Matthew. The Pharisees were trying to trick Jesus by having him choose sides in a theological controversy. Two schools of thought represented two opposing views of divorce. One group supported divorce for almost any reason. The other believed that divorce should be allowed only for marital unfaithfulness. This conflict hinged on how each group interpreted Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 through 4. In his answer, however, Jesus focused on marriage rather than divorce. He pointed out that God intended marriage to be permanent and gave 4 reasons for the importance of marriage. That's Matthew 19:4, we read that. Today, many homosexuals want to marry with the blessing of the church. Reasons for homosexual feelings and desires are complex and serious. Christians should not trivialize the situation or flippantly condemn the homosexual person. But Jesus made God's ideal very plain. At creation, he approved one kind of marriage bond, man to woman. These become one flesh, one before God. See also Romans chapter 1, verse 24 to 27. Where does that leave homosexual marriage? At best, it's a human invention without any biblical precedent. God created man and woman. Heterosexual monogamy is God's plan for marriage, the best plan, the only one. This law is found in Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4. In Moses' day, as well as in Jesus' day, the practice of marriage fell far short of God's intention. The same is true today. Jesus said that Moses gave this law only because of the people's hard hearts. Permanent marriage was God's intention, but because sinful human nature made divorce inevitable, Moses instituted some laws to help its victims. These were civil laws designed especially to protect the women who, in that culture, were quite vulnerable when living alone. Because of Moses' law, a man could no longer just throw his wife out. He had to write a formal letter of dismissal. This was a radical step toward civil rights, for it made men think twice about divorce. God designed marriage to be indissoluble. Instead of looking for reasons to leave each other, husbands and wives should concentrate on how to stay together. That's in Matthew 19, verses 3 through 9. Although divorce was relatively easy in Old Testament times, Matthew 19, verse 7, it was not what God originally intended. Couples should decide against divorce from the start and build a marriage on mutual commitment. There are also many good reasons for not marrying, one being to have more time to work for God's kingdom. Don't assume that God wants everyone to marry. For many, it may be better if they don't. Be sure that you prayerfully seek God's will before you make a lifelong commitment of marriage. A eunuch is an emasculated man, a man with no testicles. Jesus' point here is that some people have physical limitations that prevent their marrying, while others choose not to marry because, in their particular situation, they can serve God better as single people. Jesus was not teaching us to avoid marriage because it is inconvenient or takes away from our freedom. That would be selfishness. A good reason to remain single is to use the time and freedom to serve God. Paul elaborates this in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Now the commentary from Mark. The Pharisees were trying to trap Jesus with their question. If he supported divorce, it would be upholding the Pharisees' procedures, and they doubted that he would do that. If Jesus spoke against divorce, however, some members of the crowd would dislike his position. Some may have even used the law to their advantage to divorce their wives. More importantly, he might incur the wrath of Herod, who had already killed John the Baptist for speaking out against divorce and adultery. And that's in Mark chapter 6, verses 17 to 28. This is what the Pharisees wanted. The Pharisees saw divorce as a legal issue rather than a spiritual one. Jesus used this test as an opportunity to review God's intended purpose for marriage and to expose the Pharisees' selfish motives. They were not thinking about what God intended for marriage and were quoting Moses unfairly and out of context. Jesus showed these legal experts how superficial their knowledge really was. God allowed divorce as a concession to the people's sinfulness. Unfortunately, the Pharisees used Deuteronomy 24:1 as proof text for the sanctioning of divorce. Jesus explained that divorce is not God's ideal. Instead, God wants married people to consider their marriage permanent. Don't enter marriage with the option of getting out. Your marriage is more likely to be happy if from the onset you are committed to performance. Don't be hard-hearted like the Pharisees, but be determined with God's help to stay together. That said, we know that in our world, divorce is sometimes necessary for physical survival, for well-being of children, etc. Jesus clearly gave God's ideal for marriage in Genesis priority over Moses' permission for divorce. Jesus did not cancel Moses' teaching. However, see Matthew chapter 5, verse 32 and chapter 19, verse 9, where Jesus permitted divorce when the spouse has been unfaithful, and in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 15, where Paul recognized divorce when an unbelieving partner leaves the marriage. Divorce is wrong. It severs a holy union, but divorce is permitted. Jesus did not elaborate on the permissible reasons, but his high view of marriage surely requires that divorce be a last resort to avoid greater disaster. Women were often treated as property. Marriage and divorce were regarded as transactions similar to buying and selling land. But Jesus condemned this attitude, clarifying God's original intention that marriage brings oneness. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Jesus held up God's ideal for marriage and told his followers to live by that ideal. Okay. Yeah, I don't have much more to say about that. A lot of us are guilty of the sin of divorce, and thankfully Christ has forgiven that for us, all of us, and we should carry on with that forgiveness and live for him in a new way. Not the old way that we used to think, but in a new way that he thinks. Okay, that's all I have for today. Hope everybody has a glorious day, and we'll talk to you later.